Here's how the FBI agent described the early hours of a February morning at the Planned Parenthood clinic in Columbia, Missouri. The FBI agent says, quote, "After breaking the glass door, the defendant threw a Molotov cocktail-type incendiary device inside the building. The defendant remained standing on the sidewalk outside the door, watching the inside of the building. Sometime later, quote, smoke is visible billowing from the broken glass door of the Planned Parenthood building." That man was sentenced just over a year ago, in September 2020. The man described by that FBI agent was sentenced to 5 years in prison for setting fire to that clinic in Columbia, Missouri. In January 2020, it was a different guy. It was an 18-year-old man who had rhapsodized online about how much he wanted to shoot Democrats who support abortion rights. That young man decided at some point that he was going to bring his online threats into real life. He threw a firebomb into the Planned Parenthood clinic in Newark, Delaware. He also spray painted on the clinic building the Latin phrase for "God wills it," which is a Crusades-era battle cry that far-right activists and white supremacists have adopted in recent years. That 18-year-old pled guilty in federal court in February last year, pled guilty to throwing that incendiary device into the Planned Parenthood clinic's front window. He's set to be sentenced later on this month. Surprisingly and thankfully, in those attacks, nobody was injured, but, the attacks do keep coming. Last week, we reported that a Planned Parenthood clinic in Knoxville, Tennessee, was set on fire just a couple of weeks ago on New Year's Eve. Authorities have since determined that that was, in fact, an arson attack, and it was a complete destruction of the property. 9 fire units responded to the scene, but they couldn't save it. The clinic was in the midst of a $2 million renovation that was due to double its size. But somebody intentionally burned it to the ground. It is a total loss. This time last year, that same clinic in Knoxville, Tennessee, was attacked another time. Somebody fired a shotgun through the front doors on the anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision, January last year. That crime has never been solved. No arrests were ever made. Nearly 1 year later, no suspect has been identified. But now, in connection to the fire, there is a $10,000 reward out for information about the New Year's Eve arson attack that destroyed the Knoxville Planned Parenthood clinic. That clinic, for context here, it served 4,000 people last year. But tonight it is ash and rubble. Joining us now is Ashley Coffield. She is president and CEO of Planned Parenthood of Tennessee and North Mississippi. Ms. Coffield, it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight. I know this is a stressful time. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for having me.
Let me first just start by asking if I got any of that wrong or if I've missed out any of the important details, if there's anything that we are either misconstruing or that we don't know about, that you might know about in terms of what happened with your clinic.
No, we know from fire investigators that it was arson. They do have the evidence to prove that. And we're so grateful to them for all the hard work they're doing to get to the bottom of it.
In terms of the evidence that they've got, I am disheartened, I will say, to know that the crime this time last year in which somebody shot a shotgun through the front door of the clinic, that was never solved. Do you know anything about the strength of the evidence that allowed them to determine that this was arson? Does the strength of the evidence give you any comfort that a suspect might ultimately be identified?
I have all the faith in the world in the investigators. The Knoxville Fire Department did a terrific job protecting our neighbors from harm. It was a huge fire, Rachel, and none of our neighbors were harmed. And they worked really hard with the ATF to collect all the evidence as quickly as possible. And they're working as hard as they can to get to the bottom of it.
Roughly a month before the shooting at the clinic last year, we've read, just in terms of looking at local press, that an anti-abortion group new to the Knoxville area started protesting outside your clinic. And this group held a prayer vigil, for example, where they prayed every fire of heaven would come against this building. Given the ultimate fire at the clinic, that obviously is sort of foreboding and terrible. I don't mean to draw any supposition here, and I don't mean to connect the anti-abortion protests and these crimes that were committed, these violent crimes committed against the clinic. But I wondered if you could talk to us about the atmosphere, about the protests around the clinic, about whether you've been experiencing threatening rhetoric or threats towards your staff and patients.
Well, we have seen an increase in harassment at all of our locations in Tennessee over the past several years, which is obviously very concerning. And I can't help but relate it back to the charged rhetoric and the extreme policies promoted by our Tennessee General Assembly and our governor. You can't help but that they create an environment where harassment and hate and violence is justifiable. And I want everybody to know that we're not intimidated by that. And we are going to move forward. We are determined and committed to rebuild.
Now, you've said just here that you plan to rebuild. I know you've said that recently since fire investigators confirmed that this, in fact, was an arson. Can you talk to us about what kind of challenge that is? I mean, obviously, this financially is and logistically and in terms of the intimidation factor, this is a big deal. But this is also a clinic that was serving 4,000 people a year at this site. What are the kinds of challenges? What kind of support have you had since this crime? What are your plans in terms of how you will rebuild?
Well, right now we're helping our patients with referrals and with telehealth to the extent that we can. We're looking for a safe operating site where we can get back to work for our patients as quickly as possible. And we're thinking about what the rebuild is going to look like. Knoxville wants us to be there. Our patients need us to be there, and we are going to be there. At that clinic, we were offering abortion services. We were offering gender-affirming hormone care. We were offering free and low-cost birth control, including free IUDs. So it is a significant loss for the community. And the fire erased the really hard work of lots and lots of people who were making that expansion possible. And we were so close to being almost finished. But we are committed and determined to be back in Knoxville as quickly as possible.
Ashley Coffield, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood of Tennessee and North Mississippi. Ms. Coffield, thank you for your time tonight. And again, I know this is a difficult time. Keep us apprised of any updates. We'll keep watching for any updates from law enforcement in terms of this reward that they have put out for information leading to anyone's arrest. But we'd love to keep in touch with you about your rebuilding plans and how else this develops. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel.